as so often has been the case, the agenda, the top of the agenda, is gripped by uncertainty. It was just before noon when, a little unexpectedly, 7 positive cases were revealed here in Victoria. One led to an exposure site declared at the MCG, and that has all manner of ramifications.
Clearly, then, there's emerging issues in Victoria today, and that will have implications in a administrative sense this week. Out of an abundance of caution, all Victorian teams will be being tested, an additional test this week. The Geelong team, who's in the air and may well have landed, will be met by West Australian Police on the other end of the tarmac, and we'll get a test. In Perth, I'm worried about every single day of the last 18 months, every case. We've talked about this. We've had 4 rounds this year in the men's season, I think 4 in the women's season, that weren't impacted by COVID this year. We are a mass gathering, weekly, multiple state, cross-border business. So what everyone has done, and that's why I'm calling that today. Today, there's new challenges. We've been dealing with them for 18 months. We will work through them. What that looks like when it comes up, I'm not sure. But it's been a burden on our supporters, and they've been unbelievable. But it's also been carried dramatically by our players, our clubs, our coaches, our staff, and their families in every state in this country.
So some of the scenarios we're about to step you through are familiar. They have been utilised before, and while they have been arduous in some circumstances and they might be tiresome or inconvenient, there is a way. So to work through it, Robert, immediately after those cases were declared in Melbourne, Geelong were onto a flight and headed for Perth. While they were in the air, Western Australia tightened the border to Victoria, which meant that anyone who was arriving was into a 14-day quarantine. But an exemption has been granted that the game be played out of quarantine. So we've seen this before. Geelong landed, were met by police, the escort to a quarantine hotel, which they were booked into anyway. They are tonight awaiting tests. In some cases, officials have been tested. The players are awaiting tests. They are all confined to their rooms until that process runs over the next 4 to 6 hours.
I accept that. That's what has to happen. I don't know about the police escort.
And then
really?
They will have no contact with the Perth community. So the quarantine game essentially means there's no on-ground activations, there's no broadcast activity. So the playing surface is strictly for the players. Yep. And I think it's been the convention that a couple of rows of the stands are left vacant so that there's even more of a gap. Yep. So that's how that game is going to take place.
I think we accept that. We want the game, and there'll be a crowd allowed. And is there any crowd limits in West Australia? Do you know?
No, I think they're at full capacity, and this is another big night for the Dockers. So they lost the Len Hall tribute match, the crowd for that on Anzac Day. They've had another that was either empty or they had to move for, and this is their. What's the foundation? The Starlight Foundation.
Starlight Foundation.
Which is a huge night for them. So they'll get shortchanged in a way on what happens on the field, but they will be able to have a crowd, and they are a prime time slot on the Thursday night.
And on a footy basis, they can win this game.
Yes, and we're going to get to that in a few moments' time.
Were you just clicking your fingers there?
Yeah, I was just trying to get it to...
I haven't seen you do that in 10 years.
It's age, Robbo, just trying to get these things to come to you.
Foundation.
The MCG, so it was the Carlton-Geelong game where the positive case has been revealed from. So 31,834 is the biggest crowd in Melbourne of the weekends. There's about 2,000 fans have been progressive.
It's a lot of fans, mate. Yeah. 2,000.
So Tier 1, those closest to, who have been identified, become 14 days quarantine regardless of test result. Tier 2 is go and get tested and isolate until that is resolved. And there are Geelong families who are tied up in that as well, who were sitting in the vicinity. So you go to the footy, enjoy the game, and then bang, you get hit with this on Wednesday.
This is why McGowan, West Australia, was criticised for on the days slamming out the crowd. But if I was the Premier, I'd be leaving out the crowd because all you need is one. And we've had one at the MCG, and look what's happening. Yeah. Now it might be into the community, and we might be in lockdown tomorrow night.
Yes, so we'll get to that in a moment. So far,
Was
and
I
what's
jumping ahead
happened
again?
at the MCG and Marvel, there hasn't been community transmission from the previous positives. So the testing over this 24 hours becomes vital
enormous.
on that front. At the Sydney side of things,
Yep.
so the Giants and the Swans, the lockdown in New South Wales was formally extended for another 2 weeks, but I sort of think we all know where that's tracking. All the players, both of the clubs are resigned to the fact that they're going to spend the rest of the season here. This makes it very complicated on the family
Yeah,
front.
what's
No,
the
I don't-
major hurdle, do you know?
Well, it's what is Victoria's scenario about to be? So if Victoria goes into lockdown tomorrow,
No
can
one's
you have a
coming in.
travelling party come in and go into... It's so complex. And it also gets kicked down the list of priorities. Is the health department is suddenly on red alert today, and I imagine the extraneous stuff just has to wait. And that's going to be seen as... It's not extraneous for the players and their families who are 3 weeks and a day in, but in the overall scenario of the state. So this was the view from the Swans and the Giants today.
There is 2 clubs whose priority families are now our priority now that, as it's played out over the last days, I think there's an acceptance that they're staying here, and we will provide whatever support necessary. Now, we will get the families who want to come down here. Some may not be able to and will have to stay in Sydney, and we will support those, and we'll continue to support the clubs down here in Melbourne.
I think we'd be naive to think that there aren't blokes that are considering the possibility of potentially going back, provided that we might be here till the end of September. Where I sit on that, personally, I'd support anyone's decision because everyone's unique position is unique to their own. As a club, we haven't sat down and discussed what that looks like. So, but me personally, I'd have no problem with supporting the players in whatever they choose, just because it's such a unique circumstance.
Every day is a bit different, so we're just rolling with it and focusing on what we can control. I mean, it's training and meetings and those things, and then supporting our families as much as we can, and relying upon the AFL and authorities to be able to do the best they can.
I think rolling with the punches is exactly what you've got to deal with, and we're extremely lucky that we're still playing. Considering lots of people back in Sydney are going through clearly what people in Melbourne went through last year. So we're under no illusion that we're extremely lucky that we're still playing. But John's right, you just roll each day, and it becomes the norm.
And the whole footy industry is getting used to that. There was the sense today of, we were just getting a rhythm and a pattern, and now it's in Victoria again.
It's really interesting. You don't expect John Longmire and Leon Cameron to say anything different to what they said, but the reality is there'll be people in the parties at both those clubs. They'll be having their highs and lows, Jared. They're going to have to deal every day with emotions from different people. Either I want to get home, I've really got to get home, there's issues at home, what can I do? Well, you can't go. I mean, there's people within those clubs would have to, the word's not placate, but they certainly have to be aware of all the range of emotions, and at the same time, stay together, build up, put the wall up, get out there and compete. And, that can fracture with not the great preparation.
Yeah, and they will fluctuate, as you make a really good point then. So what does it mean in Victoria? So you checked in with the Herald Sun tonight, Robbo, and the state is on alert for snap lockdown. Does 7 from midday today become what? And there's no sense forecasting, but we know there's a low threshold, and given the example of Sydney, the Victorian government will call lockdown quickly to contain things and not take the chance of a few days, I think. Yeah,
far from an expert, Jared, but history has told us that I think the best way to combat an outbreak is to shut everyone down. And everyone goes, only 7, and everyone's got to stop working. We feel that, and it's absolutely horrible for all the small businesses. Horrible. I can't even begin to think how bad and the pressure on those families. But if it goes from 7 to 9, Jared, they're clamping. It's growing. So we've got to clamp it before it grows to those significant numbers in Sydney.
So there's a real chance that they're empty stands this weekend. So just step you through the round as it is. So the first game's going to be played out of quarantine in Perth. Brisbane will be right to play Richmond, as I understand it. So the Queensland border is still open to New South Wales. So there's not really any risk that Queensland would...
Why is that? Why is that,
Yeah,
you think?
there's a bit of brinkmanship in that. The Lions travelled today. So that is interesting that we already know the Giants and the Swans are displaced. So Melbourne and Hawthorn at the MCG may or may not have a crowd. The Bulldogs are sort of mobilising to travel early, maybe to get out tomorrow ahead of time and get themselves set on the Gold Coast. St Kilda and Port, that's fine. The Western Australian South Australian border represents no problem at the moment. The next two, Marvel and the MCG, could well be empty stands. And then the curiosity is the last one, because WA is treating the South Australian border the same as the Victorian border. 14 days if you come back. So if the Eagles go to Adelaide, the open question right now is, will they be allowed back in without serving quarantine?
So what do they do there? What's the option?
The option would be to go to Queensland, where both teams could go, play and go home. So either get the WA exemption that the Eagles can go to Adelaide, play and then go home, or move the game to Queensland where it could be staged and both are able to freely travel in and out. That's a little bit of forecasting.
Don't cut me off here. I want to say it again. I absolutely want to say it again. The truckies who busted protocols, families who busted protocols, the rich dudes who jumped in their boat and went from Sydney to Queensland and went to the Wallabies game and got $4,000 fine. I'll say it again, Jared. That Sydney stack was put in prison for 3 to 4 weeks for breaking quarantine is a national disgrace and a great shame on Western Australia. I cannot believe that the longer this goes and the lack of penalties for these people who are deliberately doing it, and a young fella was thrown in jail. I'm glad he's back playing football, but it's really growing on me, this anger I've got over it, Jared, I tell you.
I can sense that.